Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name's Cindy Piester. I'm on the board with UUJEC, and we have been very fortunate to have an incredible speaker with us today, and I'll introduce you to her in just a minute. I do want to explain to you that this is the premier webinar for UUJEC's new Peace, Equity, and Climate Task Force. For the last several years, we've had a task force focusing on the Green New Deal. And then we wanted to move forward so that we could focus more on the fact that we need peace in order to have a decent climate and a positive world for all of us UUs out there that care about social justice, climate justice. And so we formed this Peace, Equity, and Climate Task Force that will be focusing on DoD environmental and economic impacts. And as I'm sure all of you are very well aware, the United States DoD is the world's leading institutional contributor to fossil fuel pollution, the world's largest user of fossil fuels. And then we see in turn that this is taking more than 50% of our discretionary budget every month, and that's going, or every year, and that's going up. And then aren't we also seeing the impacts of these wars as the United States chooses to send weapons and funds to Israel, making the United States completely complicit in the genocide in Gaza, and with Israel moving into Lebanon, and who knows what they're going to do in Iran coming up shortly. We felt we needed to focus on these things. So we were really, really very lucky to have the amazing Marcy Winograd with us for our opening talk. And she's going to talk to us today about pushing back on the expansion of aerospace in the California's Central Valley. And I just want to say a few good things about you, Marcy, and then I'm going to let you introduce yourself a little more fully. But I want to let everyone know that I have just been so fortunate to live in the same region with Marcy. She's in Santa Barbara and I'm in Ventura. So I've been able to see her work firsthand for many years. And she's incredibly busy. She does wonderful work. She volunteers as the co-chair of the Central Coast Anti-War Coalition. She's the coordinator of Code Pink Congress, a producer for Code Pink Radio, and so much more. But since she's here and able to speak for herself, I'm going to cut that intro short and turn it over to her, and then she can present her marvelous slideshow. And Marcy, we're so glad you could be with us. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Cindy, and everybody in the Unitarian audience, all the participants. It's really quite an honor to be with you all and to share what I've learned over the past year about the effort, the attempt to expand aerospace throughout the Central Coast, 6 counties on the coast of California, from Ventura all the way up to Monterey. So I have a PowerPoint that I can share with you, and it will take a moment to set up, and I appreciate your patience. Here we go. Here we go. Okay.
All right.
We are ready to go. Yeah, you can see Central Coast Anti-War Coalition, Code Pink. This is an effort by both of those organizations. The Central Coast Anti-War Coalition is a chapter of Code Pink. And we have another group, it's called RISE, Responsible Investment in Energy and Science. And we are also huddling and strategizing on how best to push back on all of this. So here we go. What's happening here? I don't know, Cindy, what do you think? Do you recognize anyone? Did they look important? They're signing something.
I'm looking at a table with former President Johnson and several other dignitaries. It looks like leaders from other countries. Is this what I'm supposed to be
That's right.
Yeah.
And the year is 1967, when you had representatives from the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, signing the Outer Space Treaty. What is that?
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so the Outer Space Treaty basically said this: space, the moon, the stars, space itself is to be used for peaceful purposes. It's really the domain of all humankind, and we absolutely cannot have any nuclear weapons in space. States are to avoid harmful contamination of space and celestial bodies. And again, they should be used, all of these bodies, for peaceful purposes. Then we skip to, recognize anyone here? Who's this guy?
oh yeah, yeah, sure. Of course. I see President Trump and his wife Melania, and a whole cast of characters lined up behind them.
That's right. So now we skip to the year 2019, and this is when Trump signed the US, or he said he's going to establish, he established the US Space Force as the sixth wing of the US military. And the purpose, what was the purpose? To dominate space as a war-fighting domain. So right there, you could say, wait a minute. The United States was a ratifier of the Outer Space Treaty. Surely this is a violation of that treaty. And I think one could make a good argument that it is, even though the Outer Space Treaty did not ban weapons in space, unfortunately. It banned nuclear weapons in space. But even so, to say that we are going to dominate space for warfighting, that to me is a violation of the mission of the other treaty, which said we were going to use space for peaceful purposes, explore space for peaceful purposes. All right, so now we skip to the future of space on the Central Coast. So when we talk about aerospace, it's really a euphemism, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about bombs, missiles, rockets, spy satellites, all of this, also private jet service. And we look at this slide, and who do we see? We see this organization, REACH. You probably never heard of REACH. I had never heard of REACH. We'll talk more about REACH. You see the county of Santa Barbara, the county of San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly, Vandenberg Space Force Base, I believe that's them, and Deloitte. These are some of the people, some of the organizations, some of the bodies behind the expansion of aerospace on the Central Coast, where we are already so militarized, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay, so enter REACH. REACH is a lobby group that's based in San Luis Obispo. They have been able to convince the county supervisors in San Luis Obispo to give them $1.3 million. Santa Barbara, $250,000. The governor's, what does he call it? He calls it his council of advisors on space and militarism. His military advisory council, I think that's what he calls it. They have, through the Office of Business and Economic Development in the state of California, they have also given REACH quite a bit of money. And REACH has promised to put people to work in good jobs on the Central Coast. And by that, they mean jobs where people can afford a middle-class life, where people can afford the rent. The rent is so high, people are moving out. And they have promised that they're going to provide 15,000 jobs paying at least $50,000 a year by the year 2030. And they say it's an imperative that they be given this money now and everybody get behind them, because the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant will be closed. When? We don't know. It was supposed to, well, one reactor is already closed. The other reactor was supposed to close in 2025, but Governor Newsom, I suspect he twisted quite a few arms in the legislature to vote at 2 a.m. in the morning. I was listening, to extend the life of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant until at least 2030. Now, what REACH doesn't tell you is that just to decommission this plant could take thousands of workers over a long period of time, 5 to 10 years. So it's not as though hundreds, thousands of people are going to be thrown out of work tomorrow, right? There is a job to be done in decommissioning. And I've included this picture of the protests at Diablo Canyon. I'm sure, Cindy, you remember that there was a lot of outrage, and there were many protests against Diablo Canyon in the, I think it was the 80s when it went online, because it's located near several earthquake faults. All right, let's take a look at what we already have going on the Central Coast. And this is horrific when you look at it. Here we have Reach and Vandenberg Space Force Base and the Governor's Military Council and Office of Economic Development wanting to expand the weapons industry on the Central Coast. We already have over 100 companies involved in aerospace on the Central Coast. Many of them are in Goleta, next door to me in Santa Barbara. They call it the Infrared Valley. Lockheed Martin, here's one of them. They boast on their website that they create the eyeballs for military aircraft to target people, the eyeballs. We have Northrop Grumman. Many of these are located about a mile from UCSB, right next door. Northrop Grumman, this has the sole source contract for the testing, for the manufacture of the new nuclear weapons, the Sentinel, that with warheads that are supposed to be 20 times more lethal than those atomic bombs the US dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II to annihilate 200,000 people, either immediately or in the aftermath. We see L3 Harris, another supplier, as is Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, of weapons to Israel for its genocide in Gaza, and that's why I have this picture here. So we are paying through billions and billions of dollars in taxpayer dollars for Israel to buy weapons from these companies. Also Raytheon. Raytheon is one of the companies that has a very robust, for want of a better word, lobby group in Washington, D.C., continually pounding the doors of members of Congress to demand that they vote for expanded military budgets and more money for Israel. Okay, let's talk about Elon Musk, SpaceX, Vandenberg Space Force Base. So what we're looking at right now is a Falcon 9, that's a SpaceX rocket, fueled by kerosene, launching from Vandenberg, which is where they launch, to send satellites into space. What kind of satellites? Well, he talks about satellites that will connect people who don't have access to the internet. But many of these satellites are now spy satellites. In fact, Elon Musk has a contract with US intelligence to develop a vast spy network. So what's the concern environmentally? This can't be good, right? Can't be good. Look at that. All right, so kerosene is toxic, and scientists suspect it has a terrible effect on the ozone layer that protects us from the sun's ultraviolet rays, in addition to spewing all sorts of toxins into the atmosphere. And you can see the ozone layer there that we thought, oh, we've got this beat. We don't have to worry about this anymore. We have banned those ozone depleting spray cans and so forth. But now we see that with increased rocket launches, we are threatening the ozone layer once again, because not only do these rocket launches spew greenhouse gases, but also as they send these satellites into space, we know these satellites are not going to last forever. They may last 2 to 5 years before they burn up and die out, perhaps crash back to space. And in that process, they are damaging the ozone layer. So scientists are really concerned about this. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association says a 10-fold increase in hydrocarbon-fueled launches within the next 2 decades would definitely damage the ozone layer. What else? Starlink's kerosene-burning rocket engines also emit exhaust containing black carbon soot directly into the stratosphere, where a layer of ozone protects all living things. There's another issue with the increased space launches of kerosene-fueled rockets that launch all of these satellites into space, and that is space traffic. It's getting really busy up there. You think the traffic is bad down here. It's getting terrible up there. And scientists say there are now over 12,500 satellites, with the majority being in Earth's lower orbit. And they're making the sky so bright, astronomers can barely see the stars. And as they circle, sometimes as fast as 17,000 miles per hour or greater, they may crash into each other. And I believe there was a crash. Elon Musk's Starlink system has reported over 25,000 near collisions in a 6-month period related to satellite debris. Now, what's happening with these satellites? Well, Elon Musk wants to increase the launches. He says, Vandenberg Space Force Base says, we launched 6 last year, 6 kerosene-fueled rockets, which with, I don't know, 20 satellites or more each. They want now up to 50, maybe 100 increases. Initially, they're asking for 36. The California Coastal Commission said, well, we know we have to kind of comply with you as long as you comply with us. So here are these conditions we're giving you. And there were 7 conditions, 3 of which Vandenberg Space Force Base and SpaceX would not agree to. And those conditions involve monitoring the impact of these rocket launches on area wildlife with a focus on the sonic booms, because every time a rocket launches, it creates a sonic boom. And we know that that is frightening for animals, and they leave their habitats and they scatter. It's also frightening for people. I was up there in Lompoc where Vandenberg is, and people were telling me they don't want more launches. They are concerned about the impact of those sonic booms and the destabilizing impact of the rocket launches on their windows and their foundation. We also know that they are creating a lot of space debris. This is what we call junk, space junk. So as I mentioned, when the satellites reach the end of their life, they die off, but in so doing, they also may litter the space with engine parts, cables, all sorts of rocket parts, space satellite parts. And this is a problem. Trash in space. And when I went up to Lompoc, people said, I'm also concerned about space debris falling on me. And you may say, oh, that's science fiction, that's Twilight Zone. But really, it happened in Orcutt, which is near Santa Maria on the Central Coast. There was an accident where, in one newspaper report I read, space debris the size of a VW bug crashed to Earth, almost hitting a group of bicyclists. So the U.S. Air Force is tracking more than 25,000 pieces of space junk larger than 10 centimeters. That's about the size of a bagel, weighing together 9,000 metric tons. Zipping around the Earth, I said 17,000 miles per hour? No, 22,000. Okay, so let's take a look at this map. Some of you may have been to Vandenberg. It's right here. Here's Lompoc, Vandenberg Village. Here I am in Santa Barbara. Cindy, you're over here somewhere, right? Ventura. And Vandenberg is located on ancient Chumash land. It is 99,000 acres. You go up there and you can feel the ocean breeze and you go, wow, what a travesty that we are testing unarmed nuclear weapons, using this to basically potentially destroy humankind. We are using this to expand militarism, to expand our military budgets, to justify these near, what, $900 billion military budgets. And there I have, on the other side, I think you know who that is. Yeah, Daniel Ellsberg, right?
Oh, sure, our friend Daniel.
Yeah, so he was arrested, I think it was maybe 2015, 2012, in front of Vandenberg. He was there with a number, about 15 people, protesting the unarmed test launches of the Minuteman, which is the nuclear missile we have now. The Sentinel is coming, and that's probably going to be a near $2 trillion nuclear rearmament program. You know, the Pentagon calls it nuclear modernization, but I think that's a euphemism, and I would never use that word because these are new nuclear warheads. So I would say nuclear rearmament, which also is a violation of a UN treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which bound us to pursue disarmament, nuclear disarmament, not nuclear rearmament. So these are some of the players involved in this attempt to expand aerospace. Elon Musk, I mentioned, and here we see His net worth estimated at $267 billion. Jeff Bezos, 216 billion. Richard Branson, I can't see that, but I think, oh, a mere $2.6 billion. Okay, so Elon Musk, you may have seen him if you're on Twitter. He's constantly tweeting. I don't know if it's him personally, but he tweets a lot and he's very interested in the political limelight. But beyond that, you know, the objections that a lot of people had to the Coastal Commission cooperating with SpaceX was that this is a billionaire. SpaceX is a private company. Why would we be subsidizing, using public funds to subsidize a billionaire and a private company for economic gain, for profit? That it's wrong. That's not what the Coastal Commission was set up to do. The Coastal Commission was set up, its mission is to protect the coast in the public interest. Elon Musk, after the Coastal Commission said, look, we are mad. You would not even answer questions. SpaceX wouldn't even show up. And the Vandenberg Space Force Base crew, they gave a presentation and then they said, we're not answering any questions. And we're not going to cooperate with all of your mitigations. So at that point, the Coastal Commission said, all right, no, we will not grant it. And then Elon Musk filed a lawsuit. There was a report, which I read in the LA Times. I mean, we had a number of people from the Central Coast Anti-War Coalition joining Surfrider and other organizations testifying against granting the increased rocket launch request. But during that Coastal Commission conversation, in which coastal commissioners objected to the fact that Vandenberg would not answer any questions and that this was, you know, the use of public money for private gain, they also objected to his politics. And when I shared that with a friend of mine who's a lawyer, he said, oh, no, no, no. Why did they say that? Because now he's suing over First Amendment rights. Yeah. And unfortunately, one of the comments that I think one of the commissioners made was that, why should we grant Elon Musk this permit when he would not cooperate with the Pentagon, or excuse me, when he would not cooperate with our allies, the Ukrainians, who wanted to attack Crimea? Now, at the time, I remember reading Elon Musk said, I don't want to be responsible for launching World War III, you know, between nuclear powers. And what few people realize, I mean, we shouldn't be in the business, the war business to begin with, but to attack Crimea, that's crazy. You know, that's ethnic Russians, mostly ethnic Russians who want no part of Ukraine. They voted in a referendum not to be a part of Ukraine. They were ceded to administrative control to Ukraine when it was still the Soviet Union. And they actually tried to stop the 2014 coup that the US funded to the tune of $5 billion to overthrow a democratically elected government. So there are all sorts of other issues, but they were, you know, definitely attacking his politics. And that will probably come up in court. Okay, and so the reason why I'm showing you this is not just to talk about Elon Musk, but all three of them want to commercialize space, to send the wealthy, the billionaire class into space for a mere, what, I don't know, $450,000, something like that. For a 4-minute ride, why not? And I think Bezos and Branson have already done it. Musk has not, but he vows to colonize Mars, to get 1 million people up on Mars. Forget Earth.
Insane.
Okay. Next slide, uplift 2. So the argument that Reach, the lobby group out of San Luis Obispo, gives for why local governments up and down the coast should fund them and sign on to their letters for expansion of aerospace is that it's going to uplift everybody, you know? And we say at the Central Coast Anti-War Coalition at Code Pink, who is it going to uplift? Really? When you have private jets, who can afford a private jet? Who can afford to pay for a private jet ride? Certainly not the people on the right, not farm workers, not middle-class people, not upper middle-class people. I mean, it's really the 1% of the 1%. And when you talk about expansion of aerospace, bombs, missiles, oftentimes that labor is imported, skilled labor from outside. So we push back on that. And there are some interesting statistics from the Institute for Policy Studies on private jet service. And before I forget, the Reach Group is hosting an event in January at the Bacara Hotel to celebrate expansion of private jet service and expansion of aerospace in general. Private jets make up approximately 1 out of every 6 flights handled by the Federal Aviation Administration. This is according to the Institute, but contribute just 2% of the taxes that make up the trust fund that primarily funds the FAA. The median net worth of a full and fractional private jet owner is 190 million and 140 million respectively. So if you own like part-time a private jet, maybe you bring in $140 million in stock dividends or whatever. If you own a private jet, odds are you're bringing in $190 million, breaking in $190 million. I just want to go back here for a second. You know, we have a lot of farm workers in Santa Maria. I believe they're picking strawberries there, and it are the lowest paid farm workers in the state of California. Okay, odd bedfellows, but maybe not. Who is this guy? Mr.
Oh, there we go. There's a Representative Carbajal.
Okay, so Salud Carbajal, son of a farm worker, former Marine, loyal patron of the military industrial complex, votes for every military budget, sits on the House Armed Services Committee, conducted a hearing on those terrible Houthis firing at the ships attempting to deliver goods to Israel during Israel's genocide in Gaza. Salud Carbajal talking about what a great environmentalist he is as he votes for expansion of the military that we know, as Cindy mentioned, is one of the drivers of the climate crisis, the largest institutional emitter of carbon, greenhouse gases, and consumer of fossil fuels. And over on the right, we have Marco Rubio. Together, he and Carbajal are co-sponsoring legislation that would authorize tax-exempt bonds for spaceports. What's a spaceport? Oh, a spaceport is an airport for spacecraft. So now we see this in Paso Robles. They want to turn that airport into a spaceport that would then launch a lot more satellites into space. They call them cubes. They're small, maybe the size of a Rubik's Cube. And they have students at Cal Poly working on these. More space junk. One of the things that Carbajal, Rubio, those at Reach, Governor's Military Council are not taking into consideration is the pushback, the resistance from those who they depend on to service this war machine. UCSB kills. This was a protest November 11th, 2023, outside of Raytheon at their offices in Goleta. And you see the bloody hands. Here we have people trying to stop workers from going into the plant. Turn around, quit your job, go home. Some people felt that, well, maybe that's kind of privileged to say that, but you know, there've got to be other jobs. Ultimately, it's about withholding labor. It's that and other things, but that's a very key, you know, it's a key component in stopping a genocide. I will say this, in terms of Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, they are one of, you know, a few of 100 aerospace companies, but on the Central Coast, Governor Newsom wants more. You know, that's why he's funding Reach. And he has offered $200 million in tax credits to weapons companies that want to come and set up shop here on the Central Coast. Gives you a feeling of the mood there. Okay, what else? Well, at UCSB, they had a 54-day encampment called the UCSB Liberated Zone. You can see their demands there. Messages everywhere, decolonize the world, chalk, messages, banners. They created their own community, as you know, students have done across the country, where some of the students were homeless, you know. There are houseless students at UCSB. There are a lot of hungry students at UCSB. And they were serving meals and sleeping there and holding workshops. I held a workshop on how to use the Public Records Act to find out more information, I had submitted a Public Records Act request in 2021 to the University of California at Santa Barbara for a copy of all their weapons contracts copies. And I went back and forth with the Public Records Act administrator. This went on for 3 years. I did not get those records, right? And the law itself says that government is supposed to respond to these requests promptly. Initially within 10 days, but that doesn't mean they have to fulfill the request. They just have to say, we got your request. But after that, yeah, they're not supposed to wait 3 years. Well, what finally did it? What finally did it was during this encampment, I walked over with about 10 students to the administration building where we confronted an administrator about the fact that my Public Records Act request was not met. And lo and behold, within a week or so, I received the results. They were contracts signed between 2016 and 2021 with the major military contractors, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. And they were for lasers and parts for fighter jets and other weapon systems, as well as DARPA grants for research on robotic soldiers, how to make them look like people, how to make them act like people with biological limbs. On 6/12, there was a confrontation of students. There was a group of students who occupied the education building, Gerbitz, and they created a replica of, well, it was more or less an art replica of Gaza outside the building with dead bodies, chunks of concrete, with a huge banner that said something like, no one can take a final in Gaza. Universities are destroyed. And inside, they took a classroom and they turned all the furniture upside down, threw concrete everywhere, again, stuffed dead bodies, and wrote on the blackboard, genocide. Well, they said they weren't going to leave until their demands were met for divestment and demilitarization, no more weapons research for the war machine. On 6/12, the university sent out the campus police and a SWAT team to arrest them. Oops, let's see if I can. Here we go. It's powerful, right? They didn't arrest anyone because by the time they got there, everybody had left the building. It's not just at UCSB where we see this resistance, but also at Cal Poly. The president of Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo is on the board of REACH, the lobby group that is attempting to expand the weapons contractors on the Central Coast. And here we see the die-in. Another form of resistance was the strike that the University of California graduate students conducted in the spring. That was to protest, to demand that the university not engage in unfair labor practices in arresting people for exercising their First Amendment rights for speaking out against UC complicity in the genocide. The CEO or the financial advisor, I forget his exact title, for the University of California system, I think has 9 undergraduate programs. He told the regents that of the UC portfolio, I think it was 175 billion, 32 billion is invested in companies that a group like Students for Justice in Palestine would want the university to divest from. So military contractors and other companies that are complicit in the occupation. Extinction Rebellion, what's wrong with pursuing economic growth? So at the heart of all of this, the foundational principle for REACH is that economic growth is good, that we need to expand. And California, well, now it's facing a $145 billion deficit. And the way to climb out of this is to generate more business for war. But there's a whole other movement that's really questioning this idea that in the midst of a climate crisis, we can afford to keep growing the economy because growth means more carbon emissions. So how can you stem the climate crisis at the same time that you're growing the economy? Middlebury College want to hold a class or a club in this space. So now we're seeing students at the colleges saying, we need people's universities. Maybe UC, maybe MIT, maybe Columbia, maybe Harvard these are not the answer. We need to create our own university. We talk about the peace economy at Code Pink, that we need an alternative. We can't just say, this is bad, this is terrible, this is genocidal. What's the alternative? So the alternative in a peace economy would be supporting projects like the Isla Vista Community Garden, regenerative agriculture, which means really strengthening the soil, not through use of pesticides, but through other means, small businesses, farmers markets, that sort of thing. What can we do? Tell your local, state, and federal representatives that you do not want to see aerospace expanded in California on the Central Coast. No more money for REACH. You could sign up at codepink.org for the peace economy. You can email me, Marcy at CodePink, if you want to join the Central Coast Anti-War Coalition. And again, support your local small businesses, your local economy. In Santa Barbara, we had the Chamber of Commerce. REACH operates through the Chambers of Commerce. That's one of their mechanisms. And the chamber went before our Santa Barbara City Council Finance Committee and said, we want you to recommend to the full council that you give us, the city, $250,000 this year and $1 million next year and the year after to expand aerospace and to bring UCSB back into Santa Barbara. In other words, bring all this research for the weapons industry to the city of Santa Barbara itself. Well, the Finance Committee voted to recommend this, and Central Coast Anti-War Coalition, we launched a campaign against it. We were calling and emailing city council members, pointing out how this was the wrong road to go down, that we don't want this. And I also submitted Public Record Act requests for information between the chamber and REACH and Vandenberg, because I want to know to what degree is our chamber in on all of this? Vandenberg wants to expand. It's already 99,000 acres. They want to expand so they can have new infrastructure, new pipes, so they can launch more rockets, so they can test the Sentinel. And we were able to stop so far the city of Santa Barbara from colluding with the chamber, which in turn was going to contract with REACH. That was in their PowerPoint. So it's not over till it's over, but yay for the first round. And that concludes the PowerPoint.
Well, Marcy, I had a number of questions for you here. Do you have a few minutes so we can?
Of course.
Okay, so when you were first going to present this, one of my main concerns was that you use it all across the United States and that this is a local issue. It was a regional local issue. When I saw the slide that you had up there of the Earth surrounded by these satellites, and then then out in space we've got all of this space junk. This is going to impact us all, and then I'm imagining everything that you said there in terms of how this is going to help undermine our ozone layer that we were so fortunate to be able to stop that. Can you just speak a little more to how these impacts will impact the country as a whole and maybe even beyond that. I mean, it looks like this will have international impacts as well. It's not just a Central Coast issue.
Correct. Yes. So the Central Coast might be the fulcrum for the expansion of Elon Musk and other, companies involved in the commercialization and militarization of space. But certainly the impacts are felt nationwide and really worldwide when you think about it, because the ozone layer, when you talk about the destruction of the ozone layer, you're not just talking about the destruction of the ozone layer on the central coast of California. The ozone layer protects all of us from skin cancer, you know? So that's a terrible, terrible, detrimental impact. In addition, this space junk orbiting around at 22,000 miles per hour and dying out, and again, damaging the ozone layer with those satellites dying out. This is of grave concern, as well as the idea that kerosene is fueling these rockets and spewing lots of greenhouse gases. So that's the environmental, the direct environmental impact. But in terms of the military, Vandenberg Space Force Base wants to expand not to teach how to stem the climate crisis, not to teach regenerative agriculture, not to hold workshops on growing flowers, which they do grow in Lompoc. That's an alternative industry right there. But because they want to see more money set aside for war and for preparation for war. Now, when I say war for militarism, I'm not just talking about wars that are underway right now, but the preparation for war. And when we prepare for war, when we invest so much money, hurl so much money at the military budget, at the expansion of these Space Force bases, we are robbing, as Eisenhower said, we're robbing those of us of money for education, for healthcare, and other urgent needs at home.
You touched on international law at one point too. It seems like what we're doing here, I mean, okay, so going back to Space for Peace, one of the things that you threw out was, what would it look like to have a peace economy? I mean, what would it look like if our military actually did go along with international law? What a different world that would be. And I mean, just hearing you say those words, it's like, I mean, I'm in this, up to my eyeballs too. And I just go, maybe that's what we need to look at a little bit, is what is the world we could have for these young people that are in college?
Exactly. And I think in our own communities, there are probably opportunities to get involved in the local peace economy. There are probably ongoing projects that we can support. I know, as I mentioned, the Isla Vista Garden, the community garden, is a wonderful project. And a lot of it is about mutual aid too. I know that Democratic Socialists of America, they're involved in lots of mutual aid efforts. But we have to look at the alternative because, first of all, that's where the hope lies. And secondly, we are more credible when we have an alternative.
Right, and what we've just seen unfold across the United States and beyond internationally, in objecting to the genocide that's taking place, it seems like the young people have really solidly led the way, and this comes at quite a cost to them personally. I mean, what all kinds of risks are those students subjected to? What has been the fallout for students for taking this cause on as seriously as they have?
Oh, I don't think we know. I don't think we know very much right now. I think there's a lot going on under the radar. I just heard from a friend that a guy with a megaphone at Santa Cruz who was organizing for a rally was arrested for having a bullhorn. I think there's a lot of well, we saw the police that they came out in riot gear to UCSB, and they did that again at the end when they were sweeping. They arrested people when they were sweeping, and right now it seems like everything's upside down, but we know that the hammer is coming. The hammer is coming, so we need to stand with these.
Doesn't it feel like the way that it's been addressed by university administrations has been to charged these young people, a lot of them, with anti-Semitism. I mean, they've let go professors. I mean, how can we say this is anti-Semitic when all you're doing is saying, hey, this is genocide?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that we can do on that score is we can challenge the school districts and say, do not contract with the Anti-Defamation League. Anti-Defamation League is in all sorts of schools teaching about the Holocaust and genocide. But when they teach about genocide, they teach that there is no genocide occurring right now. And as you said, they teach that to criticize Israel is to be anti-Semitic. And that's hateful. That's what they're teaching. And so we should be all asking we should all be asking our school boards, do not contract with the Anti-Defamation League or any other organization that conflates anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism.
It seems to me that what unfolded here, as you've described, what Reach is doing when they refuse to answer questions. Was it Reach refusing questions, or was it the military refusing questions? They didn't want a response. They didn't want to give any responses. And so Santa Barbara City Council and the county pulled out of funding them, correct?
The city council, not the county.
Oh, okay, the city council. And then in return, Elon Musk sued them. I mean,
he's suing the Coastal Commission.
Okay.
He's saying that they are denying him his application for increased rocket launches on First Amendment grounds, that they don't like his politics. They don't like the fact that he's campaigning for Trump and that, he doesn't want to attack Crimea.
But, it also seems like a tremendous conflict of interest. I mean, supposedly the military is there to protect us, right? That's what they say. It's about national security. What in the world does it have to do with national security to charge almost to have, what did you say, 500,000 for a few minute ride for a billionaire? I mean, what does that have to do with national security?
Nothing. And we really need to get this message to our representatives in California and elsewhere, because a lot of them are signing on to this idea that the answer to economic woes is expansion of aerospace.
So Marcy, there are other people that have questions, so I think we should wrap this up and let them go ahead, because we have that section pre-recorded from your earlier time. Okay, is that good? So I can fit that in here. But do you have any last words for us that you'd like to say?
Yeah. So anyway, I want to thank all of you for listening and giving this some thought. And I want to invite you, if you're on the Central Coast of California, to email me, Marcy, MARCY, at codepink.org, and let me know if you'd like to join our coalition. If you'd like to join Code Pink, we would love to have you. So there you go. Thank you so much, Cindy, for inviting me.
Okay, thank you, Marcy. Take care. Okay.